At my husband's funeral, my own son leaned close and whispered, "Sign the insurance over, Mom. It was meant for us." His wife smirked, already eyeing my house. The cruelty cut deeper than grief. I stayed silent, letting them believe I'd surrender. Weeks later, when the lawyer read Richard's will, their faces turned white. Justice had been waiting. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The cream-colored card had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 long days, its edges curling slightly as if time itself were whispering caution. At last, I picked it up again, running my thumb across the glossy surface. The handwriting was elegant, sweeping strokes ending in a tiny heart above the eye. "Margaret, let's have lunch this Thursday. Just us girls. I've missed our talks." It was signed with Vanessa's familiar flourish. My daughter-in-law. 8 years in my son's life, 8 years in mine, and never once had she invited me to lunch. Not after holidays, not after birthdays, and certainly not during the hollow days after Richard died. Yet here she was, 6 months after I buried my husband of 40 years, reaching out with a sudden intimacy that rang hollow. I could still see the evenings of those first weeks after Richard's passing. How the silence pressed against me like a weight. How the nights stretched longer than the days. I hadn't eaten much then, hadn't wanted to. But it was Emily, my niece, who slipped into my grief like a lifeline. She brought me meals, made sure I took my medication, and sat with me until dawn when sleep refused to come. Emily had been my anchor, not Daniel, not Vanessa, and certainly not this sudden girls' lunch invitation. Still, something in me had agreed. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps obligation. Or maybe it was simply the habit of politeness, the kind Richard used to remind me of when I wanted to avoid someone. The Magnolia Room gleamed like a palace of polished crystal when I arrived that Thursday. Chandeliers spilled golden light over velvet chairs, and waiters in pressed uniforms moved with the indifference of royalty. It was exactly the sort of place Vanessa adored, grand enough to impress, expensive enough to wound a wallet. She was already seated when I entered, waving so energetically the diamonds on her bracelet caught the light and scattered it across the room. Her smile was too wide, her voice too sweet when she called out my name. "Margaret, you look wonderful," she exclaimed, rising halfway before sinking back into her seat with carefully staged elegance. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't come." I simply nodded, though in truth I had spent 20 anxious minutes sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather the courage to walk through those doors. Since Richard's death, social encounters drained me in ways they never had before. Vanessa launched into chatter before I could respond, her words spilling across the table like champagne bubbles. Tennis club gossip, Daniel's promotion, their luxurious trip to the Bahamas. Not once did she mention Richard. Not once did she ask how I was holding up. The waiter set down our entrees, and Vanessa leaned closer, her voice dropping as though she were about to confess something intimate. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, though her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of perfect timing. "Daniel and I ran into Charles Morton at the country club last weekend." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Charles Morton, Richard's banker. "What a coincidence," she laughed, the sound rehearsed, polished. "He mentioned you, of course. Said he's been trying to reach you." That was a lie. Charles Morton had never called. I would have remembered. "Actually," Vanessa continued, lowering her tone as if we shared some secret bond, "he mentioned Richard's life insurance policy. Apparently there are documents that need your signature." A coldness spread through my chest, settling heavy against my ribs. So that was why I was here. "What kind of documents?" I asked carefully, setting my fork down with deliberate calm. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes sharpened like the edge of a blade. "Oh, nothing complicated, just releasing the funds. Charles thought it might be easier if I helped you with the paperwork." She slid her purse onto her lap, her manicured hand dipping inside. "I actually brought them with me." The words struck like a warning bell in my ears. And as if scripted, Charles Morton himself appeared at our table, briefcase in hand, his smile as artificial as the flowers in the crystal vase between us. "Margaret," he said smoothly, settling into the chair beside Vanessa. "Wonderful to see you. I've been meaning to call." No, you haven't, I thought bitterly. The waiter returned with a dessert I hadn't ordered. Creme brulee, its caramelized top catching the light. Charles began unpacking his papers, his voice calm, professional, almost soothing. He spoke of family access, of shared responsibility, of co-managing funds. I could barely hear him over the pounding in my ears. The number haunted me. $750,000. Richard had been meticulous, planning for my future, ensuring I would be cared for when he no longer could. Now, as Charles's words droned on, I understood why Daniel and Vanessa had suddenly remembered I existed. It's really just a formality, Vanessa said, pushing a pen across the table toward me. Since Daniel is your only child, this makes everything simpler. Their faces leaned toward me, eager, expectant. And in that moment, I no longer saw family. I saw strangers, masked with love, but driven by greed. I need to use the restroom, I whispered. My chair scraped softly against the polished floor as I stood. Inside the bathroom stall, my hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I pressed Emily's number with urgency. "Emily, it's Aunt Margaret," I said when she answered, my voice shaking. "I need your help." By the time I returned to the table, the creme brulee had begun to melt, untouched and forgotten. But my decision was made, my resolve sharp as glass. When I returned to the table, Charles Morton had already spread his papers across the white linen cloth, his pen poised like a weapon, disguised as an instrument of civility. Vanessa leaned forward, her diamond bracelet glittering as if it too hungered for my signature. "All set," Charles said smoothly, his tone laced with false warmth. "This is a simple matter of family access. A co-management arrangement ensures security, especially since Daniel is your only son." The words family access felt like a noose tightening around my throat. I glanced at the neat columns of legal jargon camouflaging the truth. My husband's voice echoed in my mind, steady and pragmatic. "Margaret, never sign what you don't understand." Richard had always protected us. For decades, he had carried the weight of our finances with meticulous care, ensuring every dollar had purpose, every investment had meaning. He had built a fortress of security, one he trusted I could maintain after he was gone. And now here they were, eager to dismantle it brick by brick for their own gain. Vanessa's smile widened, a predator cloaked in charm. "It's really just a formality, Margaret. You'll be free of the hassle and Daniel will handle the details. Less stress for you." "Less stress," she said, as if signing away my future were an act of mercy. The waiter set the creme brulee between us, the custard trembling slightly in its porcelain dish, the burnt sugar crust gleaming. I hadn't ordered it, but Vanessa clasped her hands together in delight. "Your favorite," she announced, though she had never once asked me what I liked. Charles adjusted his glasses, tapping the papers. "All we need are your initials here, here, and here, then your signature at the bottom." I stared at the pen lying between us, its metallic sheen catching the chandelier's glow. A thin object, so small, yet with the power to strip me of everything Richard had left behind. I folded my hands in my lap, my voice calm but cold. "This seems sudden." "Not at all," Vanessa replied quickly, too quickly. "We've been thinking about this for some time. Daniel wants to ensure you're comfortable, that you never have to worry about these burdens. Isn't that what Richard would have wanted?" Her invocation of his name was a dagger. Richard would never have wanted this, never a scheme masquerading as love. "I'll need a moment," I said softly, rising from the table. Neither protested. Vanessa reached for her spoon instead, tapping the crust of the dessert with unnecessary force, the sharp crack echoing as I walked away. In the sanctuary of the restroom, I pulled my phone from my purse with trembling hands. My reflection in the mirror was pale, almost ghost-like, but my eyes burned with clarity. I dialed the one person I trusted. Emily answered on the second ring. "Aunt Margaret?" "Emily," I whispered, gripping the phone as though it were a lifeline. "I need your help, now." She didn't hesitate. She never did. Within minutes, the decision was made. Every cent of Richard's life insurance, $750,000, was transferred directly into Emily's account. Safe, untouchable, out of reach from the greedy hands waiting just outside the restroom door. When I returned, the atmosphere was unchanged. Charles shuffled papers, Vanessa leaned forward eagerly, the creme brulee now cracked open, custard softening beneath the caramel shell. Only I was different. My resolve had hardened. "All right," Charles said with a beaming smile. "Just a signature here, Margaret, and we'll take care of the rest." I looked down at the papers, at the spaces left blank for my consent. Then I lifted my gaze to their faces. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt the weight of his strength within me, steadying my voice, anchoring my soul. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said, letting the words fall with measured precision. Vanessa's hand froze midair, spoon clattering against the china. "What do you mean?" "The funds have already been allocated," I told them, my voice steady, clear. "Every penny has been transferred. They're no longer available for management or discussion." Confusion flickered across Vanessa's face, quickly replaced by disbelief, then fury. "You did what?" she hissed, her mask of charm shattering in an instant. Charles blinked, his practiced calm faltering. "Margaret, surely you didn't—" "I did," I interrupted, rising from my chair. "Richard entrusted me with our future, and I've made sure it remains secure. There will be no signatures today. Not for you, not for anyone." The custard sat half-eaten, the sugar crust shattered, melting into a pool of sweetness that now tasted bitter. Vanessa's face flushed crimson, her composure unraveling. Her voice trembled with barely contained rage. "You'll regret this, Margaret. You don't know what you've just done." But I did. For the first time since losing Richard, I felt a glimmer of strength return to my bones, a flame burning steady against the cold air of betrayal. As I left the Magnolia Room, the chandeliers still glittering overhead, I didn't look back. 3 sharp knocks rattled the stained glass in my front door, the sound reverberating through the quiet house like a warning. I froze in the hallway, my coat still in my hands, the scent of Richard's cologne lingering faintly on the wool. The pounding came again, harder this time, each strike vibrating against my ribs. "Mom, open the door, now!" It was Daniel's voice, but not the boy I had raised. There was a jagged edge in his tone, desperation tangled with anger. I drew a breath, steadying myself before turning the lock. They burst inside like a storm. Daniel's face was flushed, his eyes hard, his suit wrinkled as though he had driven straight from work without stopping to breathe. Behind him, Vanessa stormed in, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her manicured nails digging into the leather of her purse. "What the hell were you thinking?" Daniel snapped, his voice a whip across the room. "Transferring Dad's money to Emily? Are you out of your mind?" The words struck like blows, but I steadied myself against the entry table, where Richard's picture still stood in its silver frame. His familiar smile seemed to watch me, urging me not to falter. "Hello to you too, Daniel," I said quietly. "Don't play games, Mom," he shot back. "That money was supposed to stay in the family." "Emily is family," I answered, my voice firm despite the trembling in my chest. Vanessa stepped forward, her tone syrupy, her eyes glinting like polished steel. "Margaret, darling, no one is questioning your judgment, but surely you can see how this looks. Daniel is your only child. That money should remain with your direct family, not elsewhere." I walked past them into the living room, not because my knees threatened to give out, but because I refused to let them dominate the threshold of my home. If they wanted this confrontation, they would do it on my terms. "The money is exactly where Richard wanted it," I said, lowering myself into the chair by the fireplace. "Safe." Daniel paced like a caged animal, raking his hand through his hair, the way he used to when caught in a lie as a teenager. "This is insane. Dad would never have wanted his money going to Emily instead of his own son." "Your father wanted his money to support me," I corrected, "and that is exactly what it's doing." "Support you?" Vanessa scoffed. "By giving it away? How is that supporting you?" "Emily hasn't been given anything," I replied. "She is safeguarding it for me." Daniel stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. "Safeguarding it from who? From me?" The hurt in his voice almost cracked my resolve, until I remembered the luncheon, the banker's briefcase, the trap they had set. "Daniel," I said softly, "when was the last time you came to check on me?" "Before today." He looked away. "I've been busy. The promotion, the new accounts." 3 months, I cut in. You've been busy for 3 months while I packed away 40 years of marriage alone. Meanwhile, Emily has been here every day, cooking for me, sitting with me when the nights are too long." His voice cracked. "So this is punishment for not visiting enough?" "This is protection," I said. "I saw the papers Charles brought. They weren't releasing funds to me. They were setting up a joint account with your name on it." "That was just to help you manage," Vanessa began. "I don't need managing," I snapped, the words sharper than I intended. "I managed this household for 40 years while Richard built his business. I am not senile. I am not incapable." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then why involve Emily at all?" I looked at him, really looked. The tailored suit, the expensive watch gleaming on his wrist, the hard set of his mouth. When had my son become a stranger? "Because I know the kind of debt you're in," I said quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "Helen Bradshaw at the bank is an old friend," I told him. "She called me 3 weeks ago, worried, after you tried to take out a third mortgage on your house." Vanessa's mask cracked. "That nosy old woman." "How much is it, Daniel?" I pressed. He hesitated, then muttered, 430,000. The number struck me like a physical blow. I gripped the armrest, steadying myself. "For what?" "The market turned," he said, his voice low, ashamed. "Some investments didn't pan out." His eyes flicked toward Vanessa. "And the lifestyle I finished for him, the vacations, the country club, the boat I heard you brag about." Vanessa straightened, her voice sharp. "We can fix this. If you just reverse the transfer." "No, hey." My voice rang through the room with more strength than I knew I had. "That's not happening." Daniel's face hardened. "You need to understand something, Mom. If you don't help us, things are going to change." "They already have," I replied. "I mean between us," he said, his chest rising and falling with fury. "If you go through with this, if you side with Emily over your own son, I don't think I can forgive that." The words hung heavy in the air, thick with finality. My own child, threatening to sever our bond for money. "Is that what you want, Daniel?" I asked softly. "To end our relationship over this?" "It's your choice," he said coldly. "Fix this transfer by tomorrow, or don't expect to hear from us again." Something inside me broke and then reformed, stronger. "Then I guess this is goodbye." Vanessa gasped. Daniel stared at me as though he no longer recognized the woman before him. "You don't mean that," he said, uncertainty cracking his voice. "I do." My hands were steady now, my heart iron. The son I raised would never have ambushed his grieving mother with a banker. He wouldn't have tried to trick me into signing away her security, and he certainly wouldn't have threatened to abandon me for refusing. Daniel's expression twisted. "This isn't over," he spat, storming toward the door. Vanessa lingered, her eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this, Margaret. When you're alone, you'll wish you had made a different choice." The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something burn inside me. Not despair, not fear, but strength. I had stood my ground, and as the silence settled heavy in the house, I realized the cost. I had just lost my son. Stay with me, because this story is only beginning. If you believe in standing your ground, share this with someone who needs to hear it. The house grew quieter after that night, the kind of silence that wasn't peace but punishment. My calendar hung on the kitchen wall with its empty squares, once filled with dinners, birthdays, and afternoons with my grandchildren. Now each blank day seemed to mock me. 2 weeks had passed since Daniel and Vanessa stormed out of my home, their threats still echoing in the corners of my memory. No phone calls, no visits, no photographs of Jacob or Sophie tucked into my mailbox. Just absence. A calculated absence meant to bend me to their will. Every morning I stood at the window with my coffee cup, watching the mailman's steady steps along the street. Though I already knew his delivery wouldn't include anything for my son, the waiting was its own kind of grief, sharp and relentless. Emily checked in twice a day, her voice a lifeline through the phone. "How are you holding up, Aunt Margaret?" she would ask, though we both knew the truth beneath my answer. I'm fine, I lied, staring at the photos still pinned to the refrigerator. Richard's smile captured forever beside a younger Daniel who once clung to his father's arm. I'm coming over tonight, Emily said one evening, not asking but declaring the way she always did when she sensed my voice wavering. I'll bring dinner. I was lucky to have her. At 38, Emily had her own busy life as a physical therapist, yet she never made me feel like an inconvenience. She simply showed up. She filled the hollow places Daniel had left behind. After our call, I wandered into Richard's study, a room that still smelled faintly of leather and cedar polish. I had barely entered it since his death, unable to face the shadows of his absence. Dust had claimed his desk, his chair, the shelves lined with books he had collected through the years. My hand trailed along a shelf, tracing a path through the gray film. That was when I noticed it, a photo album wedged between thick financial volumes. I pulled it free, surprised by its weight, the plain blue leather cover offering no hint of what waited inside. Settling into Richard's chair, I opened it. The first photograph stole my breath. Daniel, round-faced and laughing, barely a toddler, lifted high in Richard's arms. Page after page revealed the tapestry of our family life. Daniel's first bike ride, his high school graduation, the beaming smile on his wedding day. But something shifted in the later photos. In every picture with Vanessa, Richard's smile looked strained, his eyes clouded with something unspoken. Tucked beside those photos were notes, small slips of paper in Richard's precise handwriting. Daniel asked for $20K loan for business investment, no details provided. Gave $5K instead. Dated 3 years ago, Vanessa pushed for access to retirement accounts at Thanksgiving, claimed they wanted to buy lakefront property. Declined. Christmas, 2 years ago. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, each note tightening the knot in my stomach. Richard had been documenting their requests, their manipulations, the subtle erosion of trust. He had seen it all. While I had been blind, wrapped in the warmth of family gatherings, he had been quietly protecting us, quietly protecting. I closed the album, pressing my trembling hands against its cover. My chest ached with the sharp, sudden grief of realization. Had Richard tried to shield me not only from death, but from the truth about our own son? The doorbell startled me, jerking me from my thoughts. For one foolish heartbeat, hope surged that it might be Daniel, standing there ready to apologize. But when I opened the door, it was Linda Harris, my neighbor, holding a warm casserole dish between her hands. "Thought you might need this," she said kindly, pressing the glass container into my arms. "The church group's been worried about you. You haven't been at service since—" She faltered, her eyes darting away. "Thank you, Linda," I said, mustering a thin smile. She hesitated at the threshold, lowering her voice. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but we saw Daniel and his family at the Simpsons barbecue last weekend. They were telling people you've been confused, that since Richard passed, you've been making poor decisions." The casserole dish grew heavy in my hands, a weight I could barely hold. "Were they now?" Linda looked uneasy, her eyes full of pity. "I just thought you should know. People are talking." After she left, I set the dish in the refrigerator, placing it beside the others brought by well-meaning neighbors. My appetite was gone. What lingered was the sting of betrayal. Daniel and Vanessa weren't only scheming for money, they were poisoning my name, planting rumors of senility to discredit me before I could speak the truth. Drawn back to Richard's study, I reopened the album. At the very back, taped against the final page, was a sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's familiar hand. My breath caught as I tore it open. "My dearest Margaret," the letter began, dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack. "If you're reading this, then I've either shown you this album or you've found it on your own. There are things I've tried to protect you from, but perhaps I've been wrong to do so." Tears blurred the ink as I continued. Richard spoke of Daniel's borrowed money, of loans never repaid, of Vanessa's endless curiosity about our finances. He wrote of his decision to make the will and the life insurance policy ironclad. "I've arranged everything to protect you," he concluded. "Trust Emily. She knows what to do if they try anything. You are stronger than you know, my love. You always have been." I pressed the letter against my chest, my sobs breaking the silence at last. Even in death, Richard was protecting me, but the burden was no longer his to bear. Now it was mine. I thought I had uncovered everything Richard had left behind, but grief has a way of hiding truths until the heart is ready to bear them. One rainy afternoon, while searching for old tax returns in his desk, I noticed something odd. The bottom drawer never seemed to shut completely. Kneeling down, I ran my hand along the edges, and my fingers found a small latch. With a click, the panel shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth, the pages thick with Richard's familiar scent of ink and cedar. My heart pounded as I carried it to his chair, the weight of it resting heavy in my lap. Richard had never been one for journaling. In 40 years of marriage, I had never once seen him record his thoughts. Yet here it was, a secret diary he had chosen to keep from me. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. I've started this record on Attorney Morris's advice. He says documentation may be necessary. I hope he's wrong about Daniel and Vanessa, but my fears tell me otherwise. My breath caught. I turned the page with trembling hands. Daniel came to me today asking for $20,000. No explanation, just urgency. I gave him 5. He was disappointed, but Vanessa pressed harder, hinting that I was selfish. When did my son start viewing our savings as his entitlement? The words blurred through my tears. Each entry painted a clearer picture of the patterns Richard had seen. Daniel's growing recklessness, Vanessa's persistent prying into accounts, their anger whenever denied. One note chilled me to the bone. Vanessa asked pointed questions about our life insurance policy again today. She insists it's about planning for the future, but the way she looked at me made my blood run cold. I pressed the journal shut, my hands trembling too badly to continue. All those evenings when I believed family dinners were ordinary, Richard had been documenting every manipulation, every subtle theft of trust. He had been preparing for a battle I never realized we were fighting. The most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks before his fatal heart attack, stole the air from my lungs. Met with Charles Morton at the bank while Margaret was at her book club. Changed the policy structure. He seemed concerned at my insistence on the new conditions, but I was firm. If my suspicions are correct, this is the only way to protect her. Meeting Morris tomorrow to finalize adjustments to the will. Emily knows the details. She'll help Margaret if they try anything. Below his words, Richard had listed accounts, passwords, and instructions, an entire blueprint for my survival, meticulously detailed. I realized then that my decision at the Magnolia Room had not been an impulsive act of courage. It had been the fulfillment of Richard's plan, the last measure of his love reaching me beyond the grave. A warm tear splashed onto the page. I closed the journal gently, as though it were his hand I was holding. The doorbell rang, sharp against the storm outside. I wiped my eyes quickly, expecting Emily with dinner. But when I opened the door, it was Eleanor Hayes, Vanessa's mother. She stood stiffly on the porch, her umbrella dripping, her face pale but composed. "Margaret," she said, her voice lacking the warmth of her earlier visits. "May I come in?" I hesitated but stepped aside. Eleanor settled herself on the edge of the sofa, her back straight, her hands folded primly in her lap. She looked less like a guest and more like a judge preparing her verdict. "I'll be direct," she said. "Daniel and Vanessa are struggling. Their financial troubles have reached the country club. They're being dropped from committees, whispered about. It's humiliating." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely truthfully. Her eyes hardened. "They told me what you did, transferring Richard's insurance money away from the family. It's unnatural." "Unnatural," I repeated softly. "Is that what they're calling it?" "You must understand how it looks," she pressed. "A widow turning against her only son. People are talking, Margaret." I thought of Richard's careful records, the journal still heavy in my chest of drawers. "Did they happen to mention why I did it?" "They said you've been confused since Richard passed," Eleanor replied, her tone carrying both pity and accusation. "They believe Emily has influenced you." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled us both. "Is that what they're saying?" "Margaret liked it," she said gently. "Whatever disagreements you've had, surely they can be resolved. They're your family." I studied her face, saw the worry etched into her expression. She believed them. Of course she did. She was a mother defending her child, just as I once had. "Tell me, Eleanor," I asked quietly. Has Vanessa ever asked you for money? The slight flinch in her eyes was answer enough. That's not relevant, she said quickly. It's entirely relevant, I replied. How much? Everyone goes through rough patches, she muttered defensively. Vanessa has expensive tastes, yes, but they are over $400,000 in debt, I cut in. Her composure cracked, shock flickering across her face. That can't be true. I wish it weren't, I sighed. That is why they wanted Richard's life insurance so desperately. It was never about helping me manage, it was about rescuing themselves. She sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers twisting in her lap. Finally, her voice broke into a whisper. I had no idea. I walked her to the door, a strange mix of sadness and vindication tightening in my chest. She left without another word, her umbrella swallowed by the storm. That night, I sat with Richard's journal again, reading every word until the ink seemed etched into my heart. By the end, one truth stood unshakable. I hadn't betrayed Daniel. I had honored Richard's last wish. But the cost of carrying that truth alone was heavier than I had ever imagined. Stay with me, because what I found next revealed even deeper wounds, and the storm had only just begun. If you believe truth should never be silenced, share this story. The November wind howled through the trees as I boxed up old coats for donation, the house echoing with the quiet rhythm of my solitary chores. I had long since stopped expecting surprises at the door. So when the bell rang, sharp and insistent, I nearly ignored it, assuming it was another casserole from the church ladies. But when I opened the door, the sight before me stole my breath. Jacob, my 12-year-old grandson, stood there huddled against the cold, his backpack slung over one narrow shoulder. His cheeks were flushed from the wind, his eyes downcast beneath the brim of his cap. What are you doing here? I gasped, pulling him inside before the frost could bite deeper. He shook his head. I took the bus. The bus? My heart clenched. That's nearly an hour's ride, Jacob. Your parents must be worried sick. They don't know I'm gone, he mumbled, setting his backpack on the floor. Dad's at work. Mom's at her spa day. I ushered him into the kitchen, the warmth of the house wrapping around him. He had grown taller since I last saw him, his shoulders stretching into the early signs of manhood. Yet his face was tired, the shadows beneath his eyes too heavy for a child. Are you hungry? I asked, already pulling bread and peanut butter from the pantry. He nodded, sliding into a chair at the table. His hands fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve, his silence louder than words. As I spread the peanut butter, I studied him from the corner of my eye. His small frame looked thinner, his skin pale. Grief surged in me, grief for the time stolen, for the distance forced between us. I miss you, Grandma, he said suddenly, his voice breaking. Why don't you come over anymore? The knife stilled in my hand. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, setting the plate before him. It's complicated. Is it because of money? His eyes lifted, uncertain, searching. I heard Dad and Mom fighting. They said your name. They said it's your fault. The words pierced me, cruel in their innocence. I steadied my voice. Your dad and I had a disagreement about some financial matters after Grandpa died. Jacob hesitated before taking a bite of his sandwich. Is that why Dad says we're not supposed to talk to you? He told me and Sophie that you're confused, that you're making bad decisions. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing back the wave of anger that threatened to spill. What else did he say? Jacob shifted uncomfortably, his sandwich untouched. That you gave Cousin Emily all of Grandpa's money. That it was supposed to be for us, for college. My throat tightened. Daniel, had twisted the truth into another blade, using his own children as pawns. That's not quite right, I said gently, brushing Jacob's hair back from his forehead. The money was Grandpa's life insurance. It was meant to take care of me. Emily is keeping it safe, that's all. Sometimes grown-ups make arrangements to protect what's important. He chewed slowly, considering my words, his young face older than it should have been. They fight a lot now, he admitted after a long pause, about bills, credit cards. I hear them when they think we're asleep. Mom cries sometimes. Dad says we might have to sell the boat in the vacation house. His voice dropped to a whisper. He said it's your fault. I reached across the table and took his hand. Jacob, listen to me. None of this is your fault, and your parents' financial problems didn't start with me. They began long before Grandpa passed. His small fingers curled around mine, seeking reassurance. I figured, he murmured. Dad keeps getting envelopes with red stamps on them. He gets really mad when they come. Collection notices. My heart broke for him. Grandma, he said softly, eyes pleading, can I stay here just for a little while? The question shattered me. Oh, sweetheart, you know I would love nothing more. But we need to call your parents. They'll be worried. They won't even notice until dinner, he muttered bitterly. Even so, I reached for my phone. We need to let them know you're safe. When Daniel answered, his voice was taut with panic. Mom, have you seen Jacob? He's missing. He's here, I interrupted. He's safe. He took the bus. Relief echoed in his exhale, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Put him on the phone now. I handed the phone to Jacob. His face fell as Daniel's voice roared through the receiver, loud enough for me to hear fragments. Grounded for a month. Worried sick. How dare you? Jacob's eyes brimmed with tears as he handed the phone back. Dad's coming, he whispered. He's mad. Let me talk to him. Daniel's voice snapped through the line. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't think this changes anything. After hanging up, I sat beside Jacob on the couch, letting him lean against me as he used to when he was smaller. We didn't speak much, just flipped through old photo albums, pointing at pictures of his father as a boy. For a brief, fragile moment, the house felt alive again, filled with laughter long buried. All too soon, tires crunched against the gravel driveway. Just so you know, Jacob whispered, slipping on his backpack. I'm glad I came. I missed you. I hugged him tightly, memorizing the feel of him in my arms. I missed you too, sweetheart. So much. The door opened, and Daniel stood on the porch. His face was drawn, his eyes haunted, his voice clipped. Get in the car, Jacob. Jacob hugged me once more before trudging past his father. Daniel lingered, his gaze fixed on the floor. For a heartbeat, I glimpsed the boy I once knew, the one who used to run through this house barefoot, laughing. Thank you, he said stiffly, for calling. As they drove away, I stood in the doorway, the cold wind biting my cheeks. Something had shifted. The silence had cracked. Not reconciliation, not yet, but a small window had opened, and through it, the possibility of change flickered faintly in the winter air. Snowflakes drifted past the window, dissolving against the glass in fragile patterns as I waited. My hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. The coffee shop was quiet, its hum softened by the season. I had chosen this place carefully, neutral ground, somewhere public, but private enough for the conversation I dreaded. The bell above the door jingled, and Daniel stepped inside. His boots left faint marks of slush on the floor as he paused, scanning the room. He looked thinner, the confident swagger he once carried, replaced by a weary slump in his shoulders. The sharpness in his features was dulled, replaced by lines I didn't remember. He ordered quickly at the counter before joining me, sliding into the chair across from mine. His hands gripped his cup with a tension that betrayed his calm facade. Thank you for meeting me, I said quietly. He nodded, his eyes lowered. Michael, Jacob, wouldn't stop asking about you. He's been difficult since his little adventure. 6 weeks had passed since that night Jacob appeared at my door. It's been a long time, I said. I was beginning to think you'd never call. Daniel stared into his coffee as though searching for words at the bottom of the cup. I almost didn't. The silence between us stretched, thick with the weight of all that had been lost. Mother and son, blood bound us, but betrayal had fractured the foundation. How are the children? I asked at last, my voice softer than I intended. They miss you, he admitted, his tone almost breaking, especially with Christmas coming. The ache in my chest deepened. And you? I asked carefully. And Vanessa? His jaw tightened. If you're asking whether we're still drowning in debt, the answer is yes. That's not what I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so achingly like Richard's that my breath caught. We're managing. The financial advisor you suggested has been helpful. I blinked, surprised. After Jacob's visit, I had mailed Daniel the contact information for Richard's old advisor, though I doubted he would ever use it. I'm glad, I said, cautious hope stirring. We had to sell the boat, he confessed. The vacation house is next. Vanessa isn't taking it well. I could imagine. Vanessa had always measured her worth in possessions, in the envy of others. Losing them must have felt like losing her reflection. And you? I asked gently. Daniel lifted his eyes at last, and for a moment I saw Richard in him. I've been an idiot, Mom. The simple admission trembled in the air, raw and unvarnished. I said nothing, allowing the truth to stand on its own. The advisor showed us the numbers, he continued, his voice heavy. Even if you had given us Dad's entire insurance policy, it wouldn't have saved us. We were bleeding money too fast, spending way beyond what we had. My hand inched across the table, stopping just short of touching his. It's not too late to turn things around. That's what Jacob said, he murmured, a faint smile breaking through. Out of the mouths of babes, right? Pride stirred in me for my grandson's wisdom, but it was Daniel's next words that pierced deepest. I found Dad's journal, he said. I inhaled sharply. After you told me where to look. His eyes flickered with shame. I read every word. I don't know how to reconcile the son he described, that with the man I thought I was. We all have blind spots, I said softly, especially when it comes to those we love. He drew in a shaky breath. I owe you an apology for the lunch ambush, for the threats, for keeping the kids from you. Yes, I agreed simply, you do. He blinked, startled by my bluntness, then let out a short laugh. No sugarcoating. I suppose we're past that. We are, I said firmly. His expression softened. I told the kids the truth, that I was wrong, that you weren't punishing us, you were protecting yourself. Sophie wants to know when she can see you. My heart leapt. I'd like that very much. He hesitated. About the money, I raised a hand. The insurance stays with Emily. That's non-negotiable. I know, he said quickly. That's not what I was going to ask. I studied him, waiting. The advisor suggested bankruptcy, he said, his voice hushed. A fresh start. Vanessa hates the idea, says it's humiliating, but I think it's our only option. It would mean changes, I warned. Big ones, downsizing, years of rebuilding. He sighed. Everything Vanessa despises. What do you need from me? His answer came without hesitation. Advice, and maybe a second chance to be your son. The wall I had built around my heart did not crumble, but a door cracked open, letting in a sliver of light. That depends, I said, on what kind of son you choose to be moving forward. He nodded slowly, accepting the condition. I don't want to be the man Dad wrote about, the one who thought his hard work was mine by right. I want to change. Vanessa? I asked carefully. His face clouded. She's not there yet. She still blames you. But she'll either come around or... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I straightened. Here's my offer. I'll help you navigate this. With guidance, not money. You may bring the children to visit any time. And if you commit to financial recovery, I'll consider setting up education trusts for Jacob and Sophie. Trusts only they can access, only for school. His eyes filled with a storm of emotions. Gratitude, humility, and a flicker of the old resentment quickly suppressed. That's more than fair, he whispered. It's what your father would have wanted, I replied. When we parted outside, snowflakes swirled between us. Daniel hesitated, then reached out awkwardly and pulled me into a hug. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered against the cold air, for everything. I know, I said, holding him for the briefest of moments before letting go. This is a beginning, not an ending. As I watched him walk to his modest sedan, I understood. The road ahead would be long, uncertain. Trust once shattered could not be rebuilt overnight. But for the first time in months, I felt the heaviness in my chest ease. Richard's final gift had not been money. It had been clarity, the strength to stand firm, even when it meant standing alone. And now, perhaps, the fragile chance to guide my son back to the man he was meant to be. Stay with me. If this story has touched your heart, share it, like it, and subscribe so more can hear how love, betrayal, and redemption weave through every family's story. The first snow of December lay across the ground in a quiet hush, softening the sharp edges of the world. My house, once a shell of silence, began to stir again with sounds I thought I had lost forever. It started with a knock at the door, tentative this time, not demanding or angry. When I opened it, Sophie stood there, her cheeks pink from the cold. Jacob beside her with that same shy determination I had seen the night he appeared on my porch. Behind them, Daniel hovered, uncertain, as though he wasn't sure he belonged anymore. "Grandma!" Sophie's voice rang through the hallway like music. She flung herself into my arms, her small frame warm and solid against me. I closed my eyes and inhaled the scent of her hair, lavender shampoo and childhood innocence. Jacob followed, quieter, but the squeeze of his arms around my waist spoke more than words ever could. Daniel lingered at the door. His eyes searched my face, hesitant, waiting for permission. I stepped aside. "Come in." "Come." The living room filled quickly with life. Coats draped over chairs, boots left haphazardly on the mat, the children's laughter tumbling through the air like bells. Sophie discovered the tin of Christmas cookies Emily had brought earlier in the week, while Jacob leafed through photo albums spread across the coffee table. "Dad looks so weird in this one," he laughed, pointing at a picture of Daniel in his high school graduation gown, hair too long, grin too wide. Sophie giggled until she snorted, covering her mouth with both hands. I sat back, watching, the ache in my chest loosening. The sound of their laughter filled the hollow corners Richard once occupied, as though he had orchestrated this very moment. Daniel joined us slowly, his posture still guarded. He studied the album with his children, his hand resting briefly on Jacob's shoulder. For the first time in months, his eyes softened. Later, as the children played a board game on the rug, Daniel leaned toward me. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting us come back. For not slamming the door in my face after everything I said." His voice faltered. "I don't deserve this." "You're still my son," I answered, my gaze steady. "That doesn't mean there aren't boundaries, but it does mean there's still a place for you here, if you choose to honor it." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm trying. I promise you, Mom, I'm trying." For once, I believed him. As the afternoon faded into evening, the smell of stew simmered in the kitchen. Emily arrived with fresh bread, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the children sprawled on the floor. She caught my gaze, and in her knowing smile I felt Richard's presence again. Dinner was noisy, imperfect, filled with interruptions and spilled milk and Sophie's endless chatter about school plays and Jacob's muttered jokes that made Daniel shake his head with a reluctant smile. It was nothing extraordinary, and yet it was everything. Afterward, when the children had fallen asleep on the couch, their heads leaning against each other, Daniel helped me carry them upstairs. In the quiet hallway, he paused, glancing at the old photograph of Richard on the wall. "Dad would have handled things better," he murmured. "Your father wasn't perfect," I reminded him, "but he was steadfast. He chose principle over comfort, even when it hurt. That's what I expect from you now." Daniel's voice cracked. "I don't know if I can be that man." "You can," I said, laying a hand over his. "The question is whether you will." His eyes glistened as he nodded, his throat too tight for words. Downstairs, I tucked a blanket over Jacob and Sophie, their faces peaceful in sleep. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting golden shadows across the room. I sank into Richard's old chair, exhaustion pulling at my bones, but peace settling over me like the snowfall outside. The silence that had once felt like punishment now seemed different, softer, more forgiving, because it was no longer empty. It was filled with possibility, with the fragile threads of reconciliation, with the sound of my grandchildren's steady breathing in the next room. For the first time since Richard's death, I did not feel alone. The new year arrived quietly, carried on the hush of winter winds that pressed against the windows of my home. Inside, the fire burned steadily, its warmth wrapping the house in something I hadn't felt in too long. Comfort. The days no longer felt like blank pages. They were filled with visits from Jacob and Sophie, laughter echoing in the hallways, and the tentative rebuilding of something fragile between Daniel and me. He came often now, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. He no longer carried himself with the arrogance of entitlement, but with the humility of someone learning to rebuild from the ground up. His luxury car was gone, replaced by a modest sedan. The suits he once wore to flaunt success had given way to simple sweaters and rolled sleeves. For the first time in years, I could see the boy Richard and I had raised, the boy who had once run barefoot through our backyard, unburdened by greed. One evening, he arrived carrying a box. He set it down on the coffee table with a sigh. "These are Dad's files. I've been going through them. The journals, the ledgers, everything." I nodded, my hands resting in my lap. "And what did you find?" He looked at me, his eyes unguarded. "The truth. Every detail of what I became. Every choice I made that pushed you away." His voice cracked. "I don't know how you can even look at me." "Because you're still my son," I said softly. "That doesn't erase what's happened, but it gives you a chance to decide who you'll be moving forward." He lowered his head, emotion tightening his throat. "I want to be better. For my kids. For you. For Dad's memory." We sat together in the glow of the fire, the silence between us no longer hostile but healing. I thought of Richard, his steady hand, his meticulous planning, his faith in my strength. Even in death, he had guided me through the storm, leading me here, to this moment. Weeks later, as spring began to soften the edges of winter, we gathered around my dining table for Sunday dinner. Emily sat across from me, laughter in her eyes as Sophie recited lines from her school play. Jacob leaned against his father, smiling at a joke that had nothing to do with money or loss. Even Daniel managed a small smile, one that reached his eyes. For a fleeting moment, I imagined Richard seated at the head of the table, watching us. I could almost hear his voice, quiet but certain. "This is what I wanted, Margaret. For you to stand strong. For you to protect what matters most." After dinner, when the children ran into the yard to chase the last of the daylight, Daniel lingered by the door. "I know it'll take time," he said, his hand resting on the frame. "But I'm grateful you didn't give up on me." "I almost did," I admitted. "But your father wouldn't have wanted that, and neither did I." He gave a small, pained smile and then joined his children outside. That night, after the house quieted again, I returned to Richard's study. I opened his journal one last time, tracing my fingers over his handwriting. His words, his warnings, his love, all of it had carried me here. I closed the book gently, placing it back in its hidden compartment, a part of him forever sealed within these walls. Standing at the window, I watched Jacob and Sophie's footprints fading in the snow beneath the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole, not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because I had found my strength. I had honored Richard's last wish. His gift had never been about the money. It had been about clarity, about courage, about love that endured beyond loss. And as I whispered his name into the night, I realized the silence that once haunted this house no longer frightened me. It was filled now with memory, with laughter, with the promise of tomorrow. "You were right, Richard," I said softly to the empty room. I was stronger than I knew. The snowflakes melted against the glass as I smiled, not because the story was finished, but because I had finally found the strength to write the next chapter of my life. If this story touched you, let it remind you that strength often rises in the places we feel most broken. Share this with someone who needs hope. Like, subscribe, and spread the message that love, even tested by betrayal, can still lead us back to truth and redemption.